Another potential challenge to Ryle that I think might go farther than the challenge that comes from the case of locked-in syndrome, however, is as follows. David Armstrong, the Australian philosopher, in the 1960s formulated an objection that goes like this. Armstrong said, I don't deny that mentality is crucially bound up with dispositions to intelligent behavior. But that can't be all there is to the story. There must be something deeper than that. Think of it this way. A shaker of salt contains stuff that's soluble. It's disposed to behave in a certain way, namely dissolve when it's put into an unsaturated liquid. But the progress of science requires that whenever possible, we take those dispositional attributions and explain why they hold, explain why they're true, explain in virtue of what salt behaves the way that it does. And physical chemistry offers precisely that explanation as to why it is that salt behaves in the way that it does when put in a fluid that's not saturated, why gasoline tends to combust, why glass tends to shatter, and so on. So, Armstrong suggests, shouldn't we also expect that there is a non-dispositional, what he calls a categorical basis for the behavior of human beings and other minded creatures when they behave intelligently? Shouldn't we expect that as science progresses, we're going to find something non-dispositional that explains why it is that angry people tend to behave in one way, sad people tend to behave in another, someone expecting rain tends to behave in one way, someone looking forward to an event they're excited about tends to behave in another. Armstrong sums this up when he writes, when I think, but my thoughts don't issue in any action, it still seems obvious that there is something actually going on in me which constitutes my thought. It's not just that I would speak or act if some conditions that are unfulfilled were to be fulfilled. And I think this quotation is in a way sort of hovering between two different thoughts, both of which are worth our attention. One of which is what philosophers now refer to as the qualitative nature of experience. Suppose we replace the example of thinking with the example of an experience. Suppose that I'm experiencing some pain. Perhaps my left ankle is aching again because of the change in the weather or something. Now, it's true that by virtue of that pain, I might tend to behave in a certain way, perhaps favor it when I walk or rub it or something. But it seems like there's more to the pain than that. The way in which pain feels, the qualitative nature of pain, doesn't seem like it's captured by the fact that I tend to behave in a certain way. Or think about the difference between a sensory experience like smell. There's a definite difference between, for example, the smell of sulfur, that rotten egg smell, and the smell, for example, of cinnamon. Those smell different ways. Do they have to be bound up with dispositions towards different behavior? It's not so clear. It's unclear to me that we can account for their difference in terms of my dispositions to behave in different ways in the face of sulfur on the one hand, cinnamon on the other, sulfur on the one hand, and burning rubber on the other. Sulfur and burning rubber are aversive. I might try to get away from them, but I don't think my behavioral responses to the two of them can track how it is they feel differently to me. So that's one disambiguation of Armstrong's objection. And I think I want to suggest that Ryle's view does not have the resources to account for what philosophers now refer to as the qualitative nature of experience. Another one is that, forgetting about the qualitative nature of experience, just the fact that I might be thinking something right now, it's true that I can be thinking something right now, even if I'm not expressing that thought, that mental event in terms of behavior. And while Ryle himself tends to be dismissive of scientific psychology, and probably also would have been dismissive of neuroscience had he been asked about it, I don't think that we have to be. We can accept some of the insights from Ryle and say, in some cases, as, for example, our progress in the sciences goes forward, as we get a deeper understanding of, for example, the neuroscience of emotion. We'll be talking about that in a future lecture, by the way. As we get a deeper understanding of the neuroscience of emotion, we can begin to understand why it is that different emotions have different behavioral implications on a non-dispositional basis. For example, we now know that under conditions of extreme anger, there's an increase of blood flow to the arms, whereas under conditions of extreme fear, there's an increase of blood flow to the legs. That's something you might expect given the kinds of emotions anger and fear are. But those are non-dispositional, categorical bases that might be part of an explanation at least, of how it is that fear and anger produce different behavioral signatures, as it were. A lot of work in contemporary affective science, which includes both neuroscience and experimental psychology, is going to, I think, shed light on why it is these dispositions to behavior that come with, for example, emotions have the shape that they do. But that requires taking some part of Ryle and and setting it aside, for the reason that Ryle, as we saw, tends to be dismissive of the entire mind-body problem. If you asked him, are you a materialist or a dualist, he would say that's a silly question, because that question presupposes that the mind is a kind of substance or thing, and I doubt that. A lot of the point of the book was to challenge that idea. Nevertheless, if we say, let's give that up, talk about mentality as dispositions to intelligent behavior, we can still say a neuroscientific examination of mentality might still shed light on things, not just phenomena such as locked-in syndrome, but also the neurological basis of, for example, emotions. And if we take that approach, we might still want to suppose, for example, that a materialist view of mentality has something going for it. In that respect, part ways with Ryle, while still hold on to the view that mentality is crucially bound up with behavior, and in many cases even behavior that's there, observable in the public eye or potentially open to public view, as opposed to part of a private, ghostly realm, something that we can all, with good reason now, find ourselves with reason to reject.